Okay, welcome everyone. Last talk, statistical physics talk of the year. We have Thierry Jolicoeur, which is in a coherent superposition between PTMS and PHT, which will collapse.
Probably, yes. Yes, probably it will collapse very soon.
Graphene and quantum coherence phenomena.
Okay, thank you, Marco, for the seminar. So it's a pleasure to be back in Saclay after a while. So I will tell you a few things about work I've been doing in the recent past. So this is really condensed matter stuff. So maybe it's a bit remote from a hardcore theoretical physics, but I hope it will be of some interest to you. So I've been working with various permutations of these colleagues, some old, some younger, and over the years we have been addressing a few problems that arise in graphene-based systems. Graphene-based systems that have been studied a lot in the monolayer form, which everybody has. Okay, no, there is some additional material. Okay, so the graphene systems I will describe have been studied in monolayer form and also in bilayer forms and also higher order stacking samples. Why is that interesting? The main topic, in fact, is the search of quantum coherence at the macroscopic level. So there are many examples that are known in solid-state physics, like superconductivity, superfluidity, polariton condensation, exciton condensation. So we know that if we describe this macroscopic coherent state in terms of let's say Hartree-Fock language, then we have particle-particle condensation with the corresponding coherence, that's superconductivity. We can have various particle-hole condensates in which you have typically exciton condensation, in which the hole is the solid-state hole in a band of a semiconductor. Polariton condensation is an interesting example of Bose condensation in which the entity, the bosonic entity, is a mixture of an exciton, which is a charge zero boson, and a photon. So that's a special quantum mechanical mode which is able to condensate. And then the exciton condensation has been observed in a very clear way in the integer quantum Hall regime in the 90s. In various semiconducting devices under a magnetic field. So this is really something which is typical of the integer quantum Hall regime, and that will be the main topic that I will describe today. So this excitonic condensation, this is something which is some part of the regime that we call quantum Hall ferromagnetism. In solid-state physics, itinerant ferromagnetism is something which is in general very hard to understand theoretically, and which is something we don't really understand quantitatively. I will try to convince you that in the quantum Hall regime there is the appearance of a simple ferromagnetism that can be understood quite clearly and very easily with Hartree-Fock theory, which happens to be exact in some limiting case. So that's a very good starting point to describe a complex physical reality. So there will be two parts of this talk. First part dealing with monolayer graphene, which I will start now, and then I will address some more specialized topics concerning the bilayer system. So monolayer graphene, so you've all seen this kind of picture, this hexagonal lattice of carbon. If you look at the band structure of this system, then that's the band structure. So there are these famous Dirac cones, two of them, if you correctly count the periodicity of the lattice. And if you are studying the neutral material without chemical doping or electrostatic gating, then the Fermi level happens to be right at the middle of this picture. So this is the zero energy. And the Fermi level means that at zero energy means that you are just at the particle-hole symmetric dispersion relation with electrons and holes eventually, and there is this very special linear dispersion relation which is true when you are close to the Fermi level. So this is the picture in zero field for the simplest description of this hexagonal lattice. If you now put a magnetic field onto this lattice, then you find a special case of the Hofstadter butterfly, which is the graph of the energy levels, so single particle energy levels, no interactions, as a function of the flux through the lattice. So this flux is so proportional to the applied perpendicular field, and when the flux is zero, then you find that there is a continuous spectrum, so that's the energy band that you saw in the previous picture. And then for non-trivial values of the flux, then there is this infinitely complicated band structure with these fractal properties. In the real world, if you look at real graphene with the angstrom scale of the lattice, then of course, for realistic values of the magnetic field, we just explore the extreme left part of the spectrum. So if you look at the extreme left part, you see that there are levels that are linearly dispersing with the field, starting from the bottom or from the top of the band. And these are the usual Landau level for a particle with a parabolic dispersion relation. Now, if you look at the band structure in zero field, then of course the bottom and the top are dispersing quadratically. And under a field, it means that you will find the ordinary Landau levels at the top of the bottom. And then the novelty is that right at zero energy, where you have the Dirac codes, under a magnetic field, you find a new set of Landau levels that have a parabolic evolution with the field. And there is a central level that does not move much for small fields. And then for larger fields, then things become infinitely many more complicated. So it means that if we now look at these two extreme cases, so the usual Landau levels so evolve linearly with the magnetic field, and there is a minimum energy Landau level. While if you look at the Landau levels deriving from the Dirac points, then you have a set of Landau levels which is particle-hole symmetric, and there is this central Landau level which does not evolve with the field. So now it's a bit different because while if you are populating only this lowest Landau level, there are no electrons below this level. While in the case of graphene, if you are populating all states up to this central Landau level, then there are people living below the Fermi level. There is a Fermi sea, which means that even if you look at a very small number of electrons in this level, then they will have interaction with the Dirac sea. So this is a point which is important when we will deal with the bilayer graphene case. So let's see. This is the simplified picture in which we just looked at these levels, starting from here. But then we have to add two important ingredients. So that's a very quick resume of what happens with Landau levels, ordinary Landau levels. When you increase the magnetic field, then you increase the separation between levels. And then the degeneracy of these levels also increases with the magnetic field, which means that if you tune B to larger values at fixed electron density and look at the lowest energy state, then the way to construct the ground state is to accumulate electrons more and more toward the bottom of the picture. And when B is large enough, then everybody will sit in the lowest Landau level. And you see that, of course, there are special closed shell configurations when you occupy an exactly integer number of levels. And for such values, you see that there is clearly a one particle gap if we forget about interactions. Interactions will change the value of the gap, but nevertheless, this gap is already present in the absence of interaction. Okay, this is a picture for a particle moving in a plane, unbounded plane, quadratic dispersion relation. real electrons do have spin, okay? And if you add spin, then of course each state is twice degenerate. So this is the Zeeman energy between the two spin states, and this is the cyclotron splitting we saw between these levels in the previous picture. If you are in the vacuum, there is the special miracle that the Zeeman splitting is exactly equal to the cyclotron splitting because the Landé G factor is 2. But in solid state physics, there are no miracles, and these numbers are just random, essentially, because you have the band mass that governs the quadratic dispersion relation, while the Zeeman coupling is renormalized by spin-orbit coupling, and this Landé G factor is some obscure number. Let's go back to graphene. So graphene, we have electrons into these very special Landau levels. They have spin, of course. So if these are the orbital Landau levels, you have in addition the spin degeneracy, and then there is what is called the Vallée degeneracy in the semiconductor language. This is the fact that it's not absolutely obvious in this picture, but if you look at the periodicity of this guy, there are 2 points. There are 2 points at zero energy. So this degeneracy is what we call the Vallée degeneracy. So which means that in each Landau level state, you can put 4 particles according to spin value and the Vallée value. So you see now that there are very special circumstances in which you have complete band filling. For these complete band fillings between different orbital states, there is a one-body particle gap, and that's a gap that should govern all physical properties that you can measure, specifically magnetic susceptibility, transport properties, and so on. And then more interesting is what will happen when you are dealing with partial filling of the levels that are one-body degenerate. And that's what we will try to understand. Let me see, first of all, I will convince you that this simple band filling effect, we see them very clearly in the experiments. So this is a very nice diagram in which you have the applied magnetic field. Then this is the density of the charge carriers. Zero density meaning that it's graphene neutrality. So it's a special number in the real world. And then you can tune these 2 parameters, B by changing the applied field. And then with gates, you can apply an electrostatic field and change the density of the charge carriers. So you are able to vary these 2 parameters in different ways. Fixed filling factor. So let's see, what we will call the filling factor, which I have not yet defined. Let me go back. That's the definition of the filling factor. This is the number of electrons divided by the number of states in a given Landau level. So this is just the number of electrons per the number of orbitals in a chemistry language that you have in the system. You see that fixed filling factor means that density and B are proportional. So phenomenon that appear at fixed filling factor should appear along lines with a fixed slope. And these are the slopes that you see clearly in this picture. The color code, so I told you about the axis, and then the color code, it's essentially the resistivity of the sample. And when it is brown, it's a bit ugly, but it means that the sample is very resistive. And that's what you expect naturally if you have a gap in the system. In the gap if you are dealing with a gap system, so it means that the fermionic density of states is low, and so the resistivity is high. Okay? And you see that, well, there are very prominent gap states, but then this is not exactly what you expect from the simple band filling picture, because you would expect large gaps due to the presence of the Landau levels between these states. These gaps, this is at fixed B, okay? So it means that it's really this cyclotron gap that you should see here in the case of graphene. But then for the integer filling of all these states with Walayan spins, then you see that there is also a gap between these states because you see filling factor, let's see, -2, -1, 0, +1, +2. It means that -2 you are right here, -1 you are right here, 0 it's here, +1 it's here, +2 it's here. These are the filling factors. So there is certainly one body gaps for the filling factors -2 and +2. But then it means that there is also some gap between the states with different values and different spin. So it's not that surprising for spin because you would say, okay, there is the Zeeman effect. But then the problem is that the magnitude of the gap, which you can measure, does not match what you should get from the Zeeman energy, and the energy scale for this gap, it's not due simply to the Zeeman energy. And in fact, no, sorry, up. Let me add one picture, maybe which is clearer. That's essentially a transformation of the previous picture in which we have used the filling factor, okay, as the horizontal axis, and then this is the B field. So fixed filling factor now appears as these huge pillars, still ugly, but anyway very clear. And then there are additional features that I will not comment today that are corresponding to the appearance of the fractional quantum Hall effect, which you can also study in some detail in these systems. Okay. So that's the observation of these gaps that gives rise to the integer quantum Hall effect in graphene. Okay, and it was observed in monolayer, that's the first part, and then maybe I will speak also about the bilayer stuff. Okay. Let's see. So in fact, when you are at integer filling of such states, then there is a very special kind of ferromagnetism that appears, and that's what is called the quantum Hall ferromagnetism. In real magnets, itinerant ferromagnets, like what happens in iron, for example, then you have electrons that are moving into bands. These bands have non-trivial dispersion, and that's something in general which is very complicated. And then you have Coulomb interaction. And we know that there is an interplay between the band structure and Coulomb interactions that gives rise to ground state that breaks symmetry and leads, for example, to ferromagnetism. And that's certainly a non-trivial phenomenon. In the quantum Hall case, then we are very lucky because the appearance of ferromagnetism is a very simple phenomenon because the band is simply flat. The lambda Hall levels are exactly degenerate. And then let me show you why, in fact, the ferromagnetic ground state happens to be the ground state of the system in this case. So we take two lambda levels, okay, and we imagine that they are essentially degenerate. So in fact, this split, it's a spin degeneracy, okay? And look at the state in which you occupy exactly all spin up, okay? The complete Fock space, of course, is hugely degenerate because you can put any of the electrons in any spin state, okay? So now, if you have filled exactly these guys, and then you apply the Hamiltonian, that's the usual Coulomb interaction Hamiltonian, which is SU2 invariant, okay? It conserves spin. It has the full spin rotation invariance. Then what happens is the following. Simply, so you have to annihilate two electrons with spin up, but then you should recreate two guys with the same spins, okay? Which means that since the band is completely full, then there is no choice but to recreate exactly the same state. That's because of rotation symmetry. So it means that if you just make this Slater determinant in which everybody is occupied with spin up, then this is an exact ground state. That's an easy calculation. And this is relevant to the physical world provided you neglect what is called Landau level mixing, which means that you decide that all the other Landau levels are essentially irrelevant. So this guy will be an exact eigenstate, provided we forget about contributions due to virtual transitions to higher or lower Landau levels. So that's a very simple case in which Hartree-Fock theory, this is later determinant, so this is what we call Hartree-Fock theory, in fact gives you an exact result. This ferromagnetic state is really the ground state of the system. This reasoning, strictly speaking, does not demonstrate that this is the ground state, it just demonstrates that it is an exact eigenstate. But after all, we are physicists, so we are really to swallow that this is the ground state. So that's an explanation why you would induce some kind of ferromagnetic ordering when you are in the case of half filling of this band, okay? So you should see states, and then once you have this ferromagnetic state, okay, okay, we're back here. It means that even if you are looking at the partial filling of an orbital state, you will find a state which is very special with an ordered ground state for all the intermediate integer filling, because of course it works only when the filling is integer. Okay, so that it means that there is something like this quantum Hall ferromagnetism that should appear for these special fillings -1, 0, and +1 in the case of monolayer graphene. In the case of -1 and +1, that's fine. We have 4 levels, okay? There is a 4-fold degeneracy, and we occupy exactly 1 level. So what I wrote then, this simple Slater determinant, provided I can replace the spin by the valley, then it gives me plausible ground states for the system. So the most interesting case is, of course, what happens for nu equal to 0, because it's slightly more complicated, because then you are dealing with 2 field levels, okay? And then you have 4 degrees of freedom. So which means that if you believe that it's easy to see, in fact, that the quantum Hall ferromagnetism phenomenon also happens in this case. Because now you construct a Slater determinant in which you occupy all special degrees of freedom, that's the K index, and then you occupy 2 vectors in the four-dimensional space made of spin and valley tensor product. So provided these 2 guys, alpha and beta, are vectors in this space, are orthogonal, taken to be orthogonal, then in fact it's very easy to see that this guy is again an exact eigenstate of the Coulomb interaction. And so that's fine. It's really a generalization of the quantum Hall ferromagnetism even when you have a 4-fold degeneracy.
Sorry, can I ask, so this approximation of neglecting the mixing with higher Landau
Yes,
level
yes.
works somehow irrespective of the magnetic field? Or,
No, it depends on the magnetic field, so absolutely.
Okay, so it works at like small magnetic field?
No, it works at high magnetic field. Absolutely. In the real world, the magnetic field is not so high, so, okay. Let's see. So now I should comment on something which is a bit implicit, which I will not technically detail what happens, but in fact the Coulomb interaction, which is of course SU2 symmetric, is in fact also Valley symmetric in the case of graphene. And then in fact there is a full SU4 symmetry in which you can rotate in these 4 degrees of freedom. So you can really classify these guys by SU4 symmetry. So with SU4 symmetry, you can look at irreducible representations of SU4. That's a very obscure way of writing down an SU4 representation when you have enough orbitals, okay? And you have several, let's see, highest weight states in this representation, and you can move between these states by SU4 representations. Okay, some of them are quite simple. So for example, you can construct states that everybody would call a spin ferromagnet, in which you have different valleys but parallel spins. Or you can construct a state which is what you would call a completely antiferromagnetic state with antiferromagnetic spins and antiferromagnetic valleys. And then there are states that are slightly different, in which you can use the same valley, but then you can be a spin antiferromagnet. And then you can, so there is now several questions that arises about this. First of all, how do they like in the real world? Because this is just a way to write down this wave function. What are the physical properties of this wave function? And then certainly we guess that there will be some fine structure effects that will break this SU4 symmetry. And what will nature do? What will be the ground state which is selected in this manifold? There may be, of course, if you dream that this symmetry is exact, there will be spontaneous symmetry breaking. But then certainly there are additional fields that will select the ground state. Of course, there is the Zeeman energy. That's a simple effect that will select the spin direction. But Zeeman energy does not act on the valley space. So then it's slightly more complicated. So let me first of all comment on the shape of these guys in real space. Now you look at the wave function, because after all you know everything. The ground state is given by this Slater determinant. So you can look at the wave function. So there are several states that are simple. So this is the ferromagnetic state, in which you picture the spin position. When you are in this special n equals 0 Landau level, in fact, the sublattice index is the same as the valley index. So that's a peculiarity of this system. So which means that the wave function of the ferromagnet is like this. This is the antiferromagnet, spin antiferromagnet and valley antiferromagnet. That's the charge density wave for obvious reasons. Then now charge is 0 and everybody is concentrated only on one sublattice. And that's another extremal state, which is what we would call the Kekulé state, in which you have linear superpositions of electrons on different sublattices. Okay. So all these guys are degenerate provided you just look at the Coulomb interaction. Fine. And then there are certainly there is the Zeeman energy that breaks the spin symmetry, and then there are probably additional effects. So after some, let's see, complicated solid state physics calculation, people have converged on the idea that maybe a simple model is to add something like this. So that's a model in which you have a delta interaction for the electrons, which is okay if they don't have the same quantum numbers. And then it should be anisotropic in the valley space. So for people that are used to spin systems, it's really like an XXZ model, but for itinerant particles. So you have XXZ coupling for the isospin, the valley, with some GZ coupling, and then some XY term, XY exchange. But then this is probably an effect which is local in terms of the magnetic length. This is not something that exists in the continuum. This is just, let's see, a mapping onto the Landau level physics. So this is certainly the leading term, and we believe that this is probably a perturbation, and there is no clear estimate for the value of these small parameters. So let's make, instead of trying to estimate them, let's make some symmetry analysis of what happens provided you add this guy. So I will parameterize this XXZ perturbation by some magnitude, G, and then some angle which measure simply the ratio of these two. Okay? And let's see what we can understand from this. So there is a SU4 symmetry which is broken. Let's see. These are the spin-only operators, isospin-only operators, that are operating only in this valley space. And then we will add, I will need also some nail kind of spin operator in which you have alternating signs in the valley space and then the usual spin. And then in SU4 you have even more generators because the total number of generators is 15. If you look at the previous Hamiltonian, there are symmetries that are obvious in the sense that if these two guys are equal, then there is an SU2 symmetry in the valley space. So that's fine. But in fact, there is more. So that's what I wrote here. If these two couplings are equal, then you have two SU2 factors, the usual SU2 spin, which will be broken by the Zeeman energy, and then there is a valley SU2. If this perpendicular G is 0, which means that if this guy is absent, then you can rotate independently the two isospins, which means that there is a symmetry, but that's pretty easy because you can really just see that by the eye. You can rotate the spins of the two valleys independently. That's fine, that's pretty obvious. But then there is a non-obvious symmetry when the sum of these two guys is 0, which we discovered, in fact, numerically by looking at spectra for small systems. If the sum is 0, it means, by the way, that so the relative sign is -1. So that's a special case for which there is an SO5 symmetry. SO5 is a subgroup of SU4, okay? And there is a set of generators. There is the spin, there is isospin along Z, and then there are these two off-diagonal generators that are a bit complicated. And then it's very easy to check that these really form the SO5 subalgebra of SU4. And you can check by hand that this is really the symmetry of this perturbing Hamiltonian. So for this special set of couplings, there is an SO5 symmetry, okay? These are the generators. And you can see that they are acting on you can make a fundamental representation of SO4 by taking the Néel vector, which I described before. So it's the alternating spin between the two valleys. And then the XY plane projection of the isospin or valley vector. And then this SO5 symmetry corresponds to a rotation in this 5-dimensional space. If you look at the physical meaning of these two guys, I say that this N vector, it corresponds really to the antiferromagnetic state in which you are both antiferromagnetic in spin and valley, while the two XY component of the isospin, it means that you are in the what I described as the Kekulé state in the picture that you saw before. So this SO5 symmetry is really mixing these two guys. That's quite funny because, in fact, this is exactly what was guessed to be relevant to ITC, where there was the idea of an SO5 symmetry in ITC that was supposed to relate antiferromagnetism to D-wave superconductivity. While this is a conjecture, which is probably less fashionable now, I would like to emphasize that this, in the case of graphene, provided this approximate model is correct, then there is for sure a symmetry which we can check, which is an SO5 that relates antiferromagnetism to the Kekulé state. Is that relevant to the physical world? So it's certainly a funny exercise in group theory. And so let's now be more concrete and look at the phase diagram of the model as a function of this small perturbing parameter, GZ, Gperp, that breaks the symmetry. So if I decide to parameterize things with the relative angle between these two guys, then we can make a phase diagram which is some kind of camembert, in which SO5 symmetry line is the anti-diagonal. And then the complete spin SU2 valley, SU2 symmetry is the opposite diagonal. Okay? And then there is also the two independent rotation in the two valleys, which is the vertical line. So that's the view of the symmetries. If you look at the nature of the phases, then you find the following. If you just do some simple mean field calculation, after all that's valid because you are dealing with Slater determinants, on which you had a small perturbation, okay, you find that you are dealing with the ferromagnetic state, the charge density wave, the Kekulé state, and then the antiferromagnetic state. And there are phase transition lines between these states, and the special SO5 model describes the phase transition between the antiferromagnetic state and the Kekulé state. That's without Zeeman field because this symmetry is further broken down by adding the Zeeman field that breaks the spin rotation symmetry, and it has the consequence of slightly moving the phase boundaries between the phases, but nevertheless the phases remains essentially the same, apart from the fact that the antiferromagnet becomes a state which is well known in usual magnetism, which is called a counted antiferromagnet, which means that you prefer to put the spins in the plane which is perpendicular to the direction of the magnetic field, and then you make them go slightly away from this perpendicular field and to have some component along the field. So this is called spin counting, okay? And this is favorable provided you have Zeeman energy on antiferromagnetism. So that's this purely antiferromagnetic phase becomes slightly counted provided you add this Zeeman energy. In the case of real graphene, it is widely believed, but that's not completely sure, that graphene is probably right here in the ferromagnetic phase and probably close to the antiferromagnet phase. And the reason for that is that if you look at the conductance of graphene under a field, it's due to the edge states of the integer quantum Hall regime. And the antiferromagnetic state and the ferromagnetic state, they don't have the same number of edge modes, which means that if you can induce a transition between these two states, then you will find that the conductance of the sample will change. And this is what is seen in experiments. So it's likely that one can play with the transition between the antiferromagnetic and the ferromagnetic state, which is quite close to this special SO5 symmetry line that I've been discussing. Okay, so let me now tell you why this is probably true even beyond mean field. So I told you that there is a Slater determinant which is an exact ground state, provided we forget about the anisotropic terms. The reasoning that I gave you about the Slater determinant, it works for the fully symmetric SU4 Hamiltonian, the Coulomb Hamiltonian. Okay, then you have an exact result, even if it is very simple. If you add the perturbation, then certainly it's not exactly given by the Slater determinant, not in all cases, for all values of the anisotropy, and it's possible to check if what happens using exact diagonalizations of small systems, and in fact, nothing happens beyond mean field, it seems. We are pretty convinced about that. And using these diagonalizations, that's why we observe the appearance of this special SO5 symmetry, because when you vary the ratio of these two parameters, then you find that there are very special degeneracies that happens. This is an example of the spectrum in which you see that there are multiplets that are coming together to form a super multiplet. And then now it's you need some numerology to find out what happens. So we believe that this is also true beyond mean field theory. Okay, so that's what I wanted to tell you about the monolayer graphene business. So let me now switch to a second topic, which is very closely related. Yes, please.
Before you switch,
Yes.
I have a small question about this emergent symmetry.
Yes.
Can you evaluate the range of, let's say, doping or external parameters, you have copy constant, over which the symmetry is still valid, I mean, and not broken too much?
But the symmetry, okay.
If I understood, like you have at least.
So there is a fine-tuning. It's for fine-tuning of the parameters of this microscopic Hamiltonian that there is this symmetry. It's not really emergent. It's an exact symmetry of the microscopic model. Nevertheless, of course, this microscopic model, it's not exact. But it's like the XXZ Heisenberg Hamiltonian for spin chains. It's a model, it's not exact. This is the same. This is probably even less exact.
So how much do you have to push JPERF and GZ so that the symmetry is fully broken?
It doesn't depend on the magnitude. Okay, as long as the parameters are equal, then the symmetry is there. Okay, you can ask the question.
There's only one
if
point, what you mean.
yes, there is a question which
Well,
is
in
how
the
much.
In the SO5 model, you had a whole region of fluctuations, and at zero temperature, the symmetry could be broken up to a certain temperature, and then you had a whole region of fluctuations, a bit like quantum fluctuations, over which the symmetry was operating. So it will not be the case here.
I think it's quite different. It's quite different. In addition, there is something which I will not discuss, is that it's some kind of first order transition.
Okay, so forget fluctuations.
Okay, so the fluctuations do not play any role.
Okay.
But then there is the fact that you can ask the legitimate question to know what happens if you increase this G too much. Because the picture that I described is the idea of this Coulomb SU4 symmetry, and then you add some perturbation, and you dream, of course, that this G is rather small.
Yeah.
Okay, and it's likely that it survives up to values of the order of unity. Doesn't seem to have to.
Unity of G.
Yes.
For the structure of this SO4
Yes.
symmetry of the Coulomb. I mean, microscopically.
No, for the fact that the Slater determinants are not destroyed by the additional couplings.
Okay.
Because the symmetry it has nothing to do with the magnitude.
Yeah.
Okay, let me go back now to Bernal stacking of graphene stuff. Bernal stacking means that if you look at the sample from the top, you see that they are essentially lined like this. Of course, I understand that you fear that I'm going to discuss 3-layer stacking and more. Okay, but this will not be the case. Just let me mention the important thing about why do you stack 2 layers. First of all, it's quite easy to produce in the real world, and then there is something which is which is interesting about this case. First of all, let's discuss in the absence of magnetic field. Okay. This Bernal stacking, it destroys the Dirac cones, and instead of having the special band touching with linear dispersion, then you have quadratic band touching at the Fermi level. So there are no longer any Dirac cones, but you have there's choke somewhere. Okay. So instead of 2 Dirac cones, then you have 2 quadratic band touching. So this is some K vector in the Brillouin zone, and then this is the energy. It means that the density of state doesn't go to 0. So by the way, this is interesting because even in 0 field, it means that you may have, in fact, you have a broken symmetry ground state due to Coulomb interactions. So that's a complicated phenomenon which is not in the realm of the quantum regime, but which is nevertheless very interesting. And then it means that if you compute, if now you put Landau a magnetic field and you look at the Landau levels, then it's again different from what we saw in the case of the Dirac dispersion relation. And then, by the way, there is quadratic band touching. If you look at the tri-layer case, then there is also a band touching, but which is now of cubic order. And then you guess that if you are dealing with n band touching, then it's k to the n. Absolutely. Okay. Okay, so let's look now at the Landau levels in this case. Then there is something which is very interesting, is that, of course, we have always the spin degeneracy. We have the Vallée degrees of freedom because there is band touching in 2 points in the Brillouin zone. But then there is an additional degeneracy, which is the following. The Landau levels that have orbital indices 0 and 1 are now degenerate in this case. In the usual parabolic band case, they are not at all degenerate. Let me go back a long time ago. It's the first and the second Landau levels in the plane, these two guys. Lowest Landau level, first Landau level. Now, in the bilayer graphene case, they are degenerate. But this is an accidental degeneracy. It's not protected by many things, and in the nature, we expect that it will be lifted. But then there is the problem, lifted by what exactly? And the reason is that we don't really know in details. So it means that instead of having a fourfold degenerate manifold of state close to neutrality, now we are dealing with an eightfold degenerate set of states. So it's even worse or even more interesting, okay? But then there is nothing like an SU8 symmetry. No, this cannot be the case because the orbitals that are degenerate, n equals 0 and n equal 1, they don't have the same wave functions. So they are not at all the same. There is no symmetry that relate these guys. So you have Vallée symmetry, you have spin symmetry, but 0 and 1 are not the same. But they are here, of course, so you have to fill them. So there's no real degeneracy. There are some effects that are here, that are a bit difficult to estimate from first principles. So there is the Zeeman effect that breaks spin symmetry. We have also something which is new with respect to monolayer graphene, is that you can put an electrostatic potential difference between the two layers, and this will break the Vallée symmetry. And in the quantum Hall regime, in fact, it will open a gap at the Fermi level. So it will convert this semi-metal into a semiconductor. And that's very nice, by the way, because it means that you have a semiconductor whose gap can be tuned by the applied electric field. And that's nice, because if you want to make devices, then not having a gap like in graphene, it may not be the best one can dream of, while having a tunable semiconductor is more interesting. So you can have splitting of the valleys which is tunable by the bias, new with respect to monolayer graphene. And then there are some small band structure terms that also breaks the lattice symmetries. And then more interesting are the many-body effects. By the way, okay, since the orbitals are different, the 0 and 1 orbitals are different, when you put electrons in them and look at the exchange interaction, then it's not the same. The number is not the same. The exchange integrals are not the same. And then, of course, you expect that the fine effects that breaks the SO4 symmetry of monolayer graphene, they may be changed, but they are probably still at work in this bilayer case. So maybe that's a bit boring. That's the typical Hamiltonian. We've been looking to model the one-band structure of this guy. So let me show you, provided you use some detailed model, then you find an interesting situation in which you see that, so these are energy levels, this is at a fixed, rather high magnetic field, and this is the value of the electric bias between the two layers. So this electric bias will change the splitting between the valleys, and it will change essentially slightly all Landau levels. So the picture here refers to a single spin value and a single valley value. And you see the almost degeneracy of this n equals 0 and n equals 1. And you see the next higher Landau levels that are separated by the cyclotron gap. And you see that for plausible values, well, provided you believe me, plausible values of the bias and the magnetic field, then you can tune the ordering between the levels. You can make them degenerate, and you can reverse their position. So that's a very nice situation in which these two orbital states can be tuned easily experimentally. So now the natural question which appears in this system is that, are there new coherence effects due to the orbital degeneracy? When we are dealing with usual semiconductor systems, this is something I briefly mentioned at the beginning. We know that there are very interesting states in which you can induce coherence, macroscopic quantum coherence, or exciton condensation, which is essentially the same, between differing layers. So let me go back a long time ago. It was slightly buried in the slide somewhere. Yes. Let me go back to the simple example of quantum Hall ferromagnetisms with these two degenerate states and the case. So I argue that you have a simple Slater determinant, which is the ground state. If you are dealing with a system in which there is full SU2 spin symmetry, then this Slater determinant, in fact, it's the member of the total spin multiplet. You can apply rotation of everybody, and you are just moving into a set of degenerate states. Okay? Now imagine that the two spin states, or pseudo-spin states, they belong to, you break the SU2 symmetry. You break the SU2 symmetry, and in the following way, imagine that this pseudo-spin, it's a Lyre index. So you have 2D electron gases separated in space. And pseudo-spin up means I am living in the upper layer. Pseudo-spin down means I'm living in the lower layer. Okay? Then Coulomb interactions are not the same if you are in the same layer or in differing layers because the distance is not the same. There is an interlayer distance. So there is a system in which the SU2 pseudo-spin symmetry between the Lyre index is slightly broken. Nevertheless, it's a pseudo-spin symmetry, so you can still apply the ideas of this quantum Hall ferromagnetic business, in which case you expect that you will still have a state which is close to be Slater determinant, but then what you prefer to do is to be in an XY ferromagnet. Instead of having the full SU2 symmetry, you just have U1 symmetry. And then the important physical properties of this system that will select the direction, it's the capacitance energy between these two layers, and then the exchange energy that you gain or lose if you put everybody in a single layer, or if you put an equal superposition of electrons into the upper and the lower layer. If you look at the energetics of the system, then the lowest energy Slater determinant is a Slater determinant in which electrons are delocalized between the two layers. That's the result of lowest energy considerations. And this happens even if you don't speak at all about tunneling between the layers. Nothing to do with tunneling. You prefer to do that. That's the lowest energy state. And this is what is called an interlayer coherent state, for the obvious reason that all electrons occupy one-body states that are with equal weight in the two layers. So that's a state which can be written as an exciton condensate, just by doing particle symmetry in one of the layers. So that was the first completely convincing observation of an exciton condensate in solid-state physics. In the quantum regime, we call this interlayer coherent state. Then, in graphene, you expect that probably you can also have interlayer coherent states. That would be simply the rewriting this simple state in the graphene case. But then you can also expect to produce something which is slightly more exotic, which is something with orbital coherence, in which you would say that you would pretend that electrons would prefer to occupy coherent superposition of the two orbital states. And that's something which is new, which is different from the usual interlayer coherence. That's a state which has funny properties like ferroelectric polarization, and a property which is probably very difficult to observe because the corresponding dipole moments are very small, but they are here nevertheless. It has funny collective modes, if we believe Hartree Fock on top of this guy. And so that's something which is interesting to check. So we have tried to look at the presence of this orbital coherence in this system. So I will present you a few data that suggest that in the bilayer graphene case, that's not what happens. We don't have any state with orbital coherence, but instead the system prefers to break translation symmetry, which is so prefers to modulate the electronic density and don't like very much to make orbitally coherent state. So what you would expect from looking at the energies of the simple Slater determinants, it's essentially this kind of phase diagram. So that's the applied magnetic field, and this is the bias. So this electric potential difference between the layers of the bilayer graphene. So for very large bias, you will find that everybody lies in one of these n equals 0 states. Or if the bias is very large, everybody is in the other orbitals. And in between, you can certainly construct Hartree-Fock states in which you distribute guys in coherent superposition between these two orbitals. So that's a decent trial state. But if you look at exact diagonalizations of small systems, this is not what you see. So let me just mention that for the trivial phases, then you find trivial spectra, as expected. So it looks like this, so that the many-body spectrum for a small number of electrons, I don't remember exactly how much, not many. You do that on a torus geometry, so you can classify many-body states by linear momentum. This is the modulus of the linear momentum k. These are energies. So this is the ground state. It has k equals 0, so it's a uniform ground state, as you would expect as filling completely just one Landau level with everybody in the n equals 0 state. And then you find that there is a very simple collective mode, which is obtained by promoting one electron from n equals 0 into n equal 1. So, and then this guy disperses and gives you a band which is not completely flat, but that's it. And this band is reproduced by simple calculations like RPA stuff. So that there is no miracle here. And if now so that would correspond to very large bias. It's stupid phases that are obtained here or here. If now you tune the bias to look at the possible orbital coherent phases, then you find something which is completely different. You find that the many-body spectra become very sensitive to the aspect ratio of the torus, which is something that very likely corresponds to compressible state, so a state without a gap. And you see that the system has a preferred aspect ratio in which the spectrum becomes clearer. I mean, it's very messy for when you are close to the square aspect ratio, but there is an aspect ratio in which things are simpler. It's not a very sensible physical criteria, I admit. But then if you tune the system to this aspect ratio, you see that there is a manifold of states that are quasi-degenerate, and the degeneracy is better and better with increasing system size. And this is usually taken by practitioners as a sign of symmetry breaking, of translation symmetry breaking. So we conclude that, in fact, there is no orbital coherence in this system, but instead we are dealing with non-uniform phases. In the case of bilayer graphene, there have been very detailed measurements of the physical properties of some samples in which you have bilayer graphene on top of some hexagonal boron nitride, which is a substrate which is very convenient to study graphene properties. And people have been able to map the phase diagram of the system as a function of the bias. So this is the bias, this vertical axis, and this is the filling factor. And the color code has to do with the density of electrons in the two layers. So when it is dark blue, everybody is in the lowest layer. When it is dark red, it's in the opposite layer. And there is orange and light blue, which means that there is partial polarization. So there is a lot of discussion about the meaning of this. This group has a neat interpretation of some very simple bond structure argument, which we believe is missing the non-uniform phase that we see in exact diagonalizations. So it's likely, so probably that's the conclusion I will give you on this bilayer stuff, that there is nothing like orbital coherence, which is bad for many body physics, but probably there are non-uniform phases that can be observed in this bilayer graphene system. Okay, I will stop here. My conclusion is that I hope to have convinced you that there is funny many body physics to do in these multi-layered systems. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. We have time for questions.
Yes, please.
So far in what you've explained for at least the non-layer graphene, you don't see any appearances of distinct gaps between, let's say, two spin polarized states or two valley polarized states. When you've, at some point, you've drawn how the force degeneration.
Yes.
But I seem to recall that at least experimentally, people believe that there are some gap states that are corresponds to more, let's say, spin polarized states. And then those gaps will probably depend on the magnetic field. I'm not sure that arises in this calculation, or maybe I'm missing some.
No, there is so that's the real world. Okay, so we see that there are gap states at all integer filling factors. Okay, this is what you refer to. What I've explained is that there is quantum Hall ferromagnetism, and I have described the ground states. I have not described the gaps above these ground states. Okay. So all these gaps, so that's an affirmation from my side, all these gaps, all these states are gapped with respect to charge excitations. They are not gapped with respect to spin excitations because in general they break some spin or isospin symmetry. So there are Goldstone modes, but these Goldstone modes are not charged. While there are charged excitations, these are probably very interesting because we expect that they are, at least some of them, of Skyrmion type, which means that the charge is also changing the spin or isospin texture in its neighborhood. But then it's a hard matter to compute these gaps. Is that?
Yeah,
okay.
Way more than what I asked for.
Okay. Okay. Yes, please, Marco.
So when you show the phase diagram, the active operator my function G. So you said that there is you have also this transition. You can see them in the conductance in principle because they have different number of edge states.
Yes.
But
yes.
is it, these couplings can be controlled in some way by, let's say,
No.
physical?
No, the problem, yeah, no, that's a good question, but the problem is
there
that
a way to really induce this transition in some...
the only easy control parameter we have is the ratio between the Zeeman energy and the Coulomb coupling strength, because if you tilt the sample, okay, then the Zeeman energy has nothing to do with the tilt, while the cyclotron motion has everything to do with the perpendicular component of the magnetic field, which means that you can fine-tune the ratio of the Zeeman versus the Coulomb energy, which is, well, it's not that bad.
It's not, yeah. But is that the ratio, but that's not the G coupling, or it is?
No, it's
No.
not the G coupling. No,
It's
you
the
expect
other
that Coulomb and G coupling, they are the same.
Okay.
They don't, okay.
That, okay. Thanks. Okay, unless there are other questions which I don't see, we can thank Thierry.
Okay.